The President of the United States, Donald Trump, left the G7 summit in Canada early. White House spokesperson Caroline Levitt explained that the president decided to return home because of events in the Middle East. Trump himself wrote on Truth Social, and I quote, "Everyone must evacuate Tehran immediately." Today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to join the G7 summit in Canada. He intended to discuss the purchase of weapons with Trump. Olya Koshelenko will continue.
Bathed in the rays of the setting sun during the group photo with the G7 leaders, Donald Trump draws all the journalists' attention. His spokesperson Caroline Levitt has just announced on the social network X the US president is leaving the summit early and returning home due to events in the Middle East.
I have to return. This is very important. I just want to thank our wonderful host. Fantastic job. Thank you, Canada. But, as you can probably see, just like I do, I need to return as soon as possible.
Trump's explanations do not make it any clearer why he is interrupting his participation in the summit. The Prime Minister of Canada only briefly remarks in passing that he understands the reasons.
I am very grateful to the President for being here, and I completely understand why he has to return.
However, behind the scenes there was no understanding, according to the New York Times. All the leaders except Trump advocated for de-escalation in the Middle East. Trump faces a critically important choice: whether to enter the war on Israel's side, specifically whether to destroy the heavily fortified underground uranium enrichment facility in Fordo. Reportedly, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu asked him to do this, since only American B-2 bombers are capable of penetrating the fortifications in the rocks. When asked by journalists whether the US intends to intervene, Trump replied that he did not want to discuss the issue. However, he left the following message on Truth Social.
Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. I have repeated this more than once. Everyone must evacuate Tehran immediately.
After Trump left the meeting, French President Emmanuel Macron stated negotiations on de-escalation are ongoing.
The President of the United States said a few minutes ago that negotiations are ongoing, and that's a good thing. So, if the United States can secure a ceasefire, that would absolutely be very good, and France will support it as well, and we hope they will succeed.
On Tuesday, Volodymyr Zelensky will join the leaders of the Group of Seven. The second day of the summit was planned to be dedicated to Ukraine. Zelensky was hoping to talk with Trump about purchasing weapons. Ukraine, together with its partners, also planned to persuade the United States of the need to increase sanctions pressure on Russia, including the introduction of a price cap on oil. Before leaving the summit, Trump managed to state that expelling Russia from the Group of Eight was a mistake in the first place, which led to the war.
It was a big mistake. You wouldn't have this war. Your enemy would be at the negotiating table. I even think that, in fact, he wouldn't have been an enemy at that time. There was no concept at all. If I had been president, this war would never have happened. But likewise, if he had been a member of what was then called the Gate, it was always the Gate, you wouldn't have this war now.
Russia was excluded from the Group of Eight back in 2014, immediately after the illegal annexation of Crimea. Trump has repeatedly spoken publicly in favor of allowing Putin back into the elite club. Olya Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN 1+1.
Meanwhile, as the G7 was actively discussing the conflict in the Middle East, Israel and Iran were exchanging rocket strikes for the fifth night in a row. Tel Aviv struck the state television building in Tehran right in the middle of a broadcast. The company's office was shaking while the anchor was hosting the program. They reported 3 casualties from the rocket strike. However, a few minutes later, the broadcast was resumed. The strike occurred after threats from Israel's defense minister, who stated that Iran's broadcaster must disappear. Overall, the IDF warned residents of Tehran to evacuate several districts where military targets were allegedly located. According to them, Israeli forces used surface-to-surface missiles and targeted drone storage sites. Amid these strikes and a warning from US President Donald Trump, people began leaving the Iranian capital en masse, causing traffic jams on the roads. Meanwhile, Iran launched its missiles at Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The attack occurred in 2 waves. As a result, 5 people were injured by shrapnel. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hinted on ABC News that they are considering the possibility of assassinating Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. According to earlier reports in the American press, this decision was previously vetoed by US President Donald Trump.
So, Trump and Zelensky have planned a meeting. There will be talks in Canada, where world leaders have gathered at the G7 summit. This is the first such meeting since Donald Trump's new presidential term. His trade wars with other countries and attempts to disrupt the world order suggest that the summit will be unpredictable. It is still unclear whether the partner countries will be able to issue a joint statement, especially regarding Ukraine. Our correspondent from the USA, Olga Kasilenko, has more details.
The picturesque Canadian resort of Kananaskis became the site of this year's G7 summit. For the leaders of Germany, Great Britain, Canada, and Japan, this is their first meeting in this format. But as expected, the real wild card will be Donald Trump. He has repeatedly surprised his colleagues with unpleasant surprises during group meetings. In his second term, in almost 5 months in the White House, he managed to declare trade wars on practically all partners, and even suggested that the host of this year's summit, Canada, should become the 51st American state. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, spoke with Trump on the phone on the eve of the summit. American plans against the U.S. are set to take effect on July 9th. In addition to economics, they will also discuss wars, von der Leyen announced.
We discussed the tense geopolitical situation in the Middle East, as well as the need for consistent coordination regarding the impact on energy markets. We also talked about the situation in Ukraine, the need to stop the fighting, and the importance of maintaining pressure on Russia.
The military operation by Israel against Iran began last Friday and has become the #1 topic. While Western leaders are calling for de-escalation, global oil prices have surged, which plays into Russia's hands. Because one of the topics at the summit is also reducing the price of Russian oil. According to Bloomberg, the UK and the UK support the US. And the UK is against the US. Obviously, the conflict between Israel and Iran is at the center of attention. And we will have the opportunity to talk with other leaders about the situation, which is changing rapidly, and together, convincingly, emphasize the need to de-escalate this conflict in the interests of the region and, of course, the world. Before leaving for Canada, Trump assured that there is a chance for an agreement between Israel and Iran, but he himself has repeatedly spoken about the Russian war against Ukraine. I hope there will be an agreement. I think it's time for an agreement. We'll see what happens. But sometimes they need to fight. But we'll see what happens. I think there's a great possibility that an agreement will be reached. President of Ukraine Zelensky and NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg will insist on strengthening sanctions against Russia. However, given Washington's current position, this issue is unlikely to see a quick resolution. There are doubts circulating at the colloquium that the partner countries will even be able to issue a joint statement, especially concerning Ukraine.